one of the most fundamental textbooks in studying our philosophy would really be Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. It has two parts to it. And whenever we give these talks, I often occasionally think, well, we're quoting texts as if everybody knows what they are and understands what they are and has studied and read what these texts are. I started studying Raja Yoga at the age of about 15, 16. And the interesting thing is I studied under my philosophy teacher. When he was 14, he was at the high school and he had a teacher who was enthusiastic and expert actually in hypnosis. And being an independent-minded boy, he thought and resolved, I won't let this man hypnotize me. I'm going to go, if anything, I'll hypnotize him. I'll look for a book on hypnosis. And his uncle had an extensive library, so he went to the library and looked, in those days no internet of course, looked for a suitable book. His uncle had a whole range of books, and as he was searching for this, his uncle came in. What are you looking for? And a little sheepishly he explained, I'm looking for a book on hypnosis. And his uncle, who was wise, said, well, do you not think it's better to control your own mind than to control others? Take this book, and it was Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. And that inspired him to lead a dedicated life. Now, some years later, it so happened when I first met him that I also had taken up the book and studied this Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga is called that because it's a royal path. Why is it royal? Because in Freud's language, dream is the royal road to the unconscious. That's his quote, yeah. But you see, the mind itself is a royal thing because it is literally in the headquarters. It is the mind, whatever that is, that determines whether we succeed, whether we fail, whether we are depressed or whether we are elated, and whatever we make from life. And now when that leads you to a Vedanta philosophy that emphasizes a unity of existence, you now realize, well, there's only one thing. So when we give somebody a piece of our mind, we're literally doing something like that because we're contributing toward the overall cosmic mind. In other words, we are creating a condition that goes through the whole cosmic processes, and the first person, the first entity that benefits or otherwise from any thought, resolution, intention is your own good self. It's easy to explain that. It's easy even to confirm that and verify that simply because if you are hungry and you think now, you meditate as it were on your most favorite meal, it won't be long before saliva arrives in the mouth and gastric juice gurgles up in the stomach. The mind is a very powerful thing, and in fact, the whole of spirituality, the whole of our endeavor is exactly this control of the mind, regardless of what path you emphasize. By saying that, I mean, let's take the most popular path, that is worship and love of an entity that is responsible for the rhythm and harmony of the universe that we call God. Offering a token of love, offering worship, adoration, on the basis that any entity that pours itself out freely through everything, free of charge, through the digestive system, to eat your food, and ultimately through the mind as thought, without charging you rent, without charging you or demanding anything, without judging you, no matter what theology says, nothing like that, simply freely giving. For what? Because that entity has a purpose for you, guiding you therefore through life supplying you with all the raw materials and giving the opportunity to make something from it. Kind of pancakes, if you will. Every thought being a means of molding it into a pancake, something like that. And then keeping it going through intention resolution, in other words, the power of thought. So our philosophy tells us there's a unity of existence. It is not just all separated. And so every thought will affect everything. And there's a kind of analogy of that, because there's something described as the butterfly effect. And that's purely this world, this earth, with its small environment. The idea is that a small thing like a butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon forest will actually have its reverberation everywhere and go affect the entire world. Its vibration is there because it's an enclosed system. Example of a closed system: if you have a pond and let's say it has some circular walls around it, and you happen to dabble your hands or put your feet in and splash around a little bit, don't be surprised if the waves that you create arrive at the furthest end of the pool. They will. Because waves, that's the characteristic of waves. Waves are, in a way, a displacing thing. It continues. One wave affects the next, 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 next. And the impact of the wave may not be very strong at the other end of the pool, but it will be there. You can't avoid it. So we're living in an enclosed system, a globe, and we know the impact that environmental foolishness has on the environment. So we can't be selfish about it or narrow-minded about it and say, my country, my flag, my productivity, my problems, and so on and so forth. We have to look at things in a more holistic way, and when we do that, a lot of problems get solved. Now, just the other day, we were talking about Swami Vivekananda's Mahasamadhi, where he deliberately decided that he will extract himself from the body, knowing that, firstly, he had the capacity to do it, and it was a timely thing to do. He voluntarily did it. That level of control was there. There's a biography written by Swami Nikhilananda, who also translates he puts it as Gospel of Ramakrishna, the intimate sayings, daily sayings and conversations of the great mystic Ramakrishna of the 19th century. So he starts off like this in his biography: Swami Vivekananda, the great soul, loved and revered in East and West alike as the rejuvenator of Hinduism in India and the preacher of its eternal truths abroad. He was born at 6:49, a few minutes after sunrise, on Monday, January 12th, 1863. Why is that significant? Because it was the day of the great Hindu festival, Makara Sankranti. That is when special worship is offered in India to the Ganga by millions and millions of devotees. And so the future Vivekananda first drew breath when the air above the sacred river, not so far from his house, was reverberating with prayers, worship, and religious music of thousands of Hindu men and women. Why am I reading this? Because that has an impact on cosmic events. It's not an accident. We can't say it's a random thing that just happened. Well, we can say it, of course, but our understanding of the holistic nature of the universe says it cannot be otherwise, that this influence can have no impact. Then it goes on. While Vivekananda was still in his mother's womb, she, like many other pious Hindu mothers, had observed religious vows, fasted and prayed, so that she might be blessed with a son who would do honor to the family. She requested a relative who was living in Benares to offer special worship to Vireshwara Shiva, of that holy place and seek his blessings. For Shiva, the great god of renunciation, dominated her thought. What am I saying? I'm saying that the whole impact of all of this environment was not just to do with external things. There was a movement in the minds of everybody, and more specifically, a movement in the minds of Vivekananda's mother. And so the mother, that is his mother, Bhuvaneshwari Devi, accepted the child as a gift or boon from Vireshwara Shiva and named him Vireshwara. Now it so happened my guru, and in many cases your grand guru, would be named Vireshwarananda, as the great heroic deity that is associated with the characteristics of Shiva. Anyway, the family, however, gave him the name of Narendranath Datta, calling him for short Narendra, or more endearingly Naran. And so, not only that, but there's something more that some people who are skeptics might put in the category of coincidence. Well, he was also under the influence of a philanthropy, scholarship, and independent spirit. The grandfather, Durga Charan, after the birth of his first son, had renounced the world in search of God. And the father, Vishwanath, an attorney at law, that's Vivekananda's father, of the High Court of Calcutta, was versed in English and Persian literature. Can you see the influence on the infant Vivekananda? And his father often entertained himself and his friends by reciting from the Bible and the poetry of Hafiz, both of which he believed contained truths unmatched by human thinking elsewhere. Now, his mother was a devotee, was devout. His father, more from the intellect. He was particularly attracted, that is his father, to the Islamic culture with which he was familiar because of his close contact with the educated Muslims of northwestern India. So it goes on like that. We can see how he was dedicated to Shiva, and then what are the characteristics in his later life? Exactly like Shiva. Those who examine what they call the Trinity, in this case, Ramakrishna, Sharada Devi, his consort on the other side, and Vivekananda, will see there's a representation of Vishnu, who comes into the world as a light of the world, that's Ramakrishna, and Sharada Devi as Saraswati, the feminine energy of the Creator, and then Shiva. So if you like this idea, then you have something like a trinity there. And then the whole idea of accidents, coincidence, and so on will entirely leave your interpretation of the lives of these great souls. Well, we'll come back to Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is to do, therefore, with this powerful thing called mind. And when we say mind, we now have to revalue things and say, my mind, we can take it like that. But overall, there has to be at the back of it some understanding, well, there's only one mind, a cosmic mind. And when we control this little thing called a mind, then we're now putting some kind of intention and resolution that affects the entire universe, just like every wave system will do. Now, when Swami Vivekananda dictated this book, Raja Yoga, which has two parts, the one part is the Patanjali Yoga Sutras in Sanskrit with the commentary. You have to explain a sutra is a bare minimum saying, a bare minimum thread, an aphorism. In other words, it takes hold of a wonderful learning technique. Supposing then you're making notes of these talks or something like that. You can't take down every word, no doubt, but you'll take some key ideas. Now, supposing a dozen people do it, there'll be a dozen different emphasis. One person will take one thing, another person will take another thing, something that stands out for them, something that they respond to individually. And yet, you see, these little notes will be triggers. There'll be aphoristic sayings that act as associations, word associations, in other words. And I always use this example. There's a favorite phrase in business life: time is money. You can actually say T-I-M-E, time is money, exactly. Then if you use that phrase and a whole seminar is there, let's say 2-day seminar on organization and time management, you see that time is money, that phrase will probably trigger everything you ever learned on this seminar. And so that is a wonderful trick. You don't have to remember everything. You just have to remember the highlights, the bullet points. For this reason, the sutra literature, without a living commentary, will really have not much significance or meaning. So Swami Vivekananda managed to take the old commentaries. He had that in mind as he made his own commentary. That's the second part. First part is an overall introduction, going through each kind of section of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, breaking them down a little bit in terms of meditation. In terms of meditation, that means that this whole Raja Yoga is actually a classical textbook on meditation. It is the yoga of meditation, Jnana Yoga, to do with that supreme monarch of your being called mind, Raja, like a king, a kingly thing. But it's an entirely dualistic system. So behind it, you have to have this idea of this holistic idea of one mind, of oneness, in fact, of non-dualism. Now you see, a tool bag can have a certain arrangement of different tools, let's say A to Z. But if your car gets stuck somewhere on the road, you don't take the very first tool in your tool bag. That won't be suitable. You can take one tool, the next tool, you can take all the tools one by one, and nothing might be appropriate. But you see, you can't take from the first aphorism to the last like that. You can't take the entire toolbox or selected ones, this spanner, then that spanner, like that. No, you select the one that is most suitable. It gives you a wide range of approaches and possibilities. For what end? For the end of controlling the mind in such a way that it becomes a pure, transparent vessel where the internal light shines through by itself, self-revelation. And there's only one avenue. We have to clean the mind. We have to make the mind transparent. And what is in the way? Well, to start with, our sense of I is in the way. Our sense of our mistaken interpretation of the world in front is a big, in fact, that's the mother of all obstacles. And so he gives a note to this Raja Yoga. He's actually dictating it to Miss Waldo, Miss S.E. Waldo. And you can imagine him pacing up and down with these thoughts pouring out. Now, you remember, when he is making this commentary in his day, what is there at the back of everybody's mind is this new thing competing with religion, as it were, or taking like that. That is Darwin's theory of evolution, which says there are two mechanisms for it, according to Darwin. First of all, survival of the fittest. Secondly, the other principle will be that the propagation of the species, if you want to be successful, you'll do that. So you're strong, you mate and using your strength and your arrogance to do that, and your tiger nature, if you will, to do that. And then you create a super child. That's some kind of idea like that. But the yogis of ancient days had their own theory of evolution. They said, well, wait. In fact, with a twinkle in my eye, when people say, do you believe in evolution? Thinking that if I'm a religious person of any type, then it would be completely contradictory and anathema to say no, because then you're in the camp of creation, and that's a theological position. So I can say, I don't believe in evolution. Why? Because how can I? Well, if I believe in totality, if something is a totality, it cannot change. It looks like it. So I'm prepared to accept apparent evolution. It looks like it. It looks like something that's changing. It looks like something that's occupying space. There's something in the Chandogya Upanishad which tells us that Agasha, space in this case, is superior to all the things that occupy the space. And we see that this Agasha is used in two senses. The yogis use it as an overall generalization of matter. But it can also mean space, and that means there's no difference between space and matter. A thoroughly modern physics idea. And yet, thousands of years ago, they had this idea. It's superior to the sun and the moon because the sun and moon actually occupy the space. What is behind and around the sun and moon is this thing called space. In the 1970s, there was a small spacecraft running on something like 4 watts. Not very much. And that was sent out. It did a number of visitations around Jupiter and so on, and ultimately went to the outer regions of the solar system, millions, billions of miles away. 10 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. 10 times that. And you can imagine. And for the first time, the instruments managed to register that turbulent region on the outer border of the solar system. It was very turbulent because there is the solar wind that is blowing, and even going beyond that. And it's the first craft that managed to go beyond the border, as it were, and discovered, much to the surprise of those monitoring it, that many, many years later, don't forget every signal, it takes over 20 hours, 22 hours to arrive at the Earth and another 22 hours back again. It was malfunctioning for many years and they managed to correct it wonderfully at a distance. And to their surprise, they realized you would have thought there was an element of endless, seamless calmness after the turbulence of the solar winds. No, hugely turbulent region coming to us as a hum sound. And that reminds me of how the universe is made from Om, a kind of humming sound in the background, indicating a region of turbulence. We don't think of empty space as turbulent region, and yet that's what we find. So matter and space, these seem to be completely equivalent. After all, space is the gravitational field of matter that we call gravity, mass, impinging on a kind of fabric that Einstein visualized and constructed called space-time, a space-time continuum, a 4-dimensional thing as opposed to previously a 3-dimensional thing. Length, breadth, height, okay, that's essentially space with directions and so on. But time comes in with it. And time and space then are absolutely equivalent. They are actually opposites. Now, with all of that said, what is the problem with Darwin's evolution? Well, firstly, this holistic view says there is a space superior to anything, and even beyond that, there is a totality. And the totality can never change. And many times I give you the example, funny example, of the frog scientists trying to examine a cone and assuming because they are dimensionally deficient, they cannot see a totality. They're only equipped to see apparent changes. They can't see the whole thing. When you see the whole thing, you see actually nothing's changing, but it looks like that. And the appearance of that is what we call Maya, a kind of illusion-delusion constructed like a framework for two reasons. Firstly, to obscure the truth, but secondly, for us to discover it. And we do that by taking up the toolbox that we have that Vedanta supplies us with. And so, when you take this position of totality, it becomes a contradiction, because all we have to do is uncover what we have. That is, that it is not a crude nature designed to be biting, fighting, scratching. It doesn't apply to humans. How do we know that? It's because we are interested in other things. We are interested in cultural things. What has culture to do with brute survival? Nothing. We are interested in art, interested in music, interested in philosophy and mathematics, influenced in appreciation of nature. We're interested in being able to explore in a creative way. This has nothing to do with the propagation of the species and has nothing to do with survival of the fittest. We have to look for something else. So Vivekananda is presenting an alternative, a very ancient alternative, in the midst of Darwinian ideas. And referring to it at the end of this book, Raja Yoga, we see his reference to nature in a very different way, as a mother, as a nurse, taking us gently by the hand, leading us toward our own inherent freedom. So, this evolution based on these two things is very contrary toward the Darwinian understanding of it, namely sex selection and survival of the fittest. We don't do that. I hope we don't do that in terms of relationships, human relationships. And so the Jnana Yoga lectures that Swami Vivekananda also does is a system covering the ground, plus going beyond and telling ultimately one alone is there. There are no two. One manifesting as the many. And if we can be disciplined and cultivate a certain sense of self-control, we get the revelation of that one in the middle of many. Then our problems will be solved. Because if you have a certain reference position to somebody opposing you, or a circumstance opposing you, or life is difficult, and then on reflection you really understand, oh, but there's only a oneness there, then that means you can handle it with a certain philosophical air, a certain light attitude. And so Raja Yoga is not like that. It's a dualistic system. But Swami Vivekananda reads a little bit of non-dualism into it. So there's a useful passage there in this. It says, Sati Mule, it begins like that. The root being there, the fruition comes. The fruition is automatic. It comes in the form of species, life, experience, of pleasure and pain. So that requires a little exploration. What does it mean? In the development of our potential, our potentiality is coiled up. It's a root, just like there's a root of a tree, and the fruit will be different according to the different species. So, if you are sitting beside a goat and you're both eating tomatoes, you're both eating, let us say, bananas, well, you'll find there's a difference in the species because there's an internal structure which creates a difference. What is that? Well, no matter how much we eat the same things, a goat will not do away with its horns and start lecturing, and the Swami won't develop horns and be interested in bleating. We have to control nature, therefore, and how do we do that? We do that by the manipulation of thoughts, and thoughts come in concepts, and concept comes in words, and we use the words to direct our thoughts. So what is nature then? It's a favorable arrangement of whatever thought you put out. That's the whole idea. Whatever force you generate, there's a thought or a plan or a resolution, a determination, an affirmation, a hope or a confidence, that then mobilizes the creative power of the cosmos, the willing part. It enters into a certain field called a root and produces the result in a differentiated way. And when we understand the significance of these terms of resolution, then could it be followed by a movement inside what is called attention or thought? Yes, it goes as a probe and makes a picture of what is to be done. So a kind of affirmation or resolution, technically we call it sankalpa. That's the beginning point. When puja is done in Hindu ritual, one of the first things that is done is the day, the hour, the beneficiary, and the resolution is made. Sankalpa. You make that resolution. That's why we are doing this. Same thing in life. All thought starts with, this is why we're doing it. This is what we're aiming for. Now, Swami Vivekananda puts there also in his Raja Yoga, that wonderful extract, we can bring it out, that each soul is potentially divine. The goal, so there's a direction. The goal is to manifest this divinity from, we can say from within, by controlling nature and internal, external. That is how we do it. Now, we're very good at controlling the external nature. More and more and more, and technology helps us in this way, but even big things, such as dams, and I mentioned the spacecraft, the ingenuity that went into making such a thing, and exploring more and more for the benefit of mankind, and sometimes developing things which are destructive also. A man is like that. A person is not only has this will to do good and generate wonderful relief and compassion and so on, and have this interest in cultural matters, but on the other side also destruction. Even in the name of religion it happens. So how are we doing with this sankalpa? Well, as soon as we make this resolution, we take advantage of a continuous flow, a kind of current that makes a kind of pancake out of what we have resolved. We hold on to it and again repeat the procedure. And when we do that in time, the energy that is flowing is kind of baked into a mold. That mold is held there, and further energy is poured into it like molten metal, poured into a mold. And when the mold is taken away and everything becomes solid, the statue stands there. In other words, it began with a resolution. We repeated it. We made a kind of thing. We then sustained it. And ultimately, when it was baked fully over time, it came out as something solid. We can do it, whether for good or evil, we can do it. But since our purpose is to discover this our own immortal being, this oneness, not some kind of separateness, solving all our difficulties and problems, we have to mobilize these cosmic creative force that we call thought. So the cosmic creative force, loosely called thought, sometimes called resolution, sometimes called determination, sometimes called affirmation, ideal, the aim, purpose in life, seeking for nobility, perfection, freedom, illumination. With thoughts like this, we can use any of these terms, by the way, then the meaning that is conveyed by these words is converted into the energy which comes to everybody as the mold made in time. Multiplied by time, the flow of this energy in the world in which we live has got a consequence. And that becomes a root. That is how species are determined. A resolution repeated becomes a root, a creative root. And even when it's disintegrated, it stands there and sucks from nature. And so thought is a suction. It draws things to us. It brings in the necessary materials, necessary ingredients. It brings us all these things to dramatize that perfection and then to manifest it. That is what is meant. And so what is coiled up in a resolution or as a resolution is something literally called coiled up kundalini, something that is coiled up. And kundalini is manifested or unrolled expression in time, space, causation, personality, number, etc. And that's life. That is nature. Nature is a cooperative field for that to help us in this. And so it has got within it this potentiality and to manifest any condition we want. It stands there in readiness to do it, to produce 24 structures, which I'm sure we've covered. Because the whole of nature can be conveniently divided into 24 structures. So we have to re-educate the mind. We have to re-educate it on the basis of a resolution, filling the mind with pictures of what we intend to do. The capacity for imaging in glorious technicolor, in great detail, will manifest what we want. And don't do it once, we'll continue doing it. And when we do that, it kind of gets into a vortex, a kind of whirlpool, a pulling power, a suction power. And thoughts repeated create a suction. Thoughts repeated create a suction. And so out of nature, the necessary ingredients are drawn forth and woven into a kind of fabric, which is the expression of our life. Nature, of course, is a contributory factor for it. But what nature? It's God's nature. There's no other nature. What we call nature is God's nature. It's the thinker's nature. So in the system, there's no God the creator. We don't stand on the opposite side of evolution and say, well, creator God. No. We don't have that creator God. There's no creator in this system, creator God. We can have it for convenience, but we have to outgrow it on a solid basis. It is only the coiled up energy uncoiling itself from nature, and the presiding principle is pure spirit. That is your own nature. That's, of course, a separate philosophical system. So as long as the root is there, as long as there's a consequence, the fructification, the fruit, should take place. Nothing really can stop it. So in what form will it take shape? It takes shape in the form of species, it takes shape in the form of conditions, it takes shape in the form of a body, a certain genetic lineage, a certain family, a certain geographic location, in other words, a certain place on the stage of life in the drama. Health is a suction. Weakness being sucked in, even if you eat the best food. Let's say, even if you eat an elephant's food, you won't get tusks on your body. You won't develop a trunk. So I'm sure about that whole statement, as I'm sure you are. The change You have to change the suction. You have to change the principle inside. You have to change the vortex. That is one principle in this system. And when you do that, what does nature do? It conforms. 24 categories all vibrate with this, because at the end of it, or the beginning of it, from where it all came, is the cosmic creative mind, otherwise called God. Not only is it a creator, but it is also the manifested creation as well. I always remember, and I quote it often, St. Columbanus, if you want to understand the creator, first understand the creation. Because the creation points its finger toward, look, 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 I'm here. So how do we make this mistake? Well, time and space have to be involved. And when we take time away, when we take space away, in other words, when we have the conditions or the parameters for making this era of change, then once we do that, we only find God standing there, nothing else. And so what we call Akasha, space, matter, that principle is God's grace standing there. And although we can translate it as space or sky or something of that nature, it is actually divine grace standing there. When he is alone, nobody else, he creates space, his energy is there. When you look into the night sky or even in the day sky, try to think that this is not something separate from you. This is purely the principle, the spirit standing there as a kind of framework for all the rest. And it contains all sound. And you must have noticed that everything really is a variation of sound, a variation of vibration. We can consider the whole life as a kind of orchestrated musical performance. You see how we can evaluate or reevaluate what we call life. We have to take each one of these elements, each one of these principles, and investigate them and see, can we experience them, and can we really get an understanding? What is this nature? Is it crude? So thought is a mental scout. It's a mental scout, as it were, carrying a program forward. And the first spurt of it is automatically accompanied by three principles. The characteristic is well known to us. Inertia is there, enthusiasm is there, all self-orientated, all orientated toward egocentric survival. If that is all there is, then we can then go back to Darwin and say, oh, we can be entirely selfish. We can be entirely consequentialist, in other words, utilitarian. We can do what we like regardless of how it affects adversely others. If somebody says, I don't believe in morality, and then you give an example of clearly a difficulty in immorality, they will soon be suffering, as it were, from moral indignation. And so mind wandering is life wandering. That's finished now. A coordinated, purposeful way of thinking, aiming at unity, aiming at harmony in your life and everywhere else. Love, light, intelligence, revelation is also accompanied by these same energies. Nature's energies, they don't tell us what to think and how to think or what the goal is. You're left free yourself to do that. But as often as we think that the nature of the thought must be analyzed according to these three conditions of inertia, dynamic energy, and harmony, it is towards light, harmony, and love, or is it towards selfishness? Is it towards self-aggrandizement, exploiting other people? You take the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it's very interesting. It tells us, I'm sure you'd rather behave like this and not like that. What are called divine qualities and demonic qualities. I'm sure we would like to have the divine qualities in us. So God's current is there. And what will we do with it? We won't suppress any negative thought. We will resist ye not evil. That's something we'll hold sacred. You'll take them. Come, welcome, have a cup of tea. It's part of the control. And we'll say, okay, given that we have the Lord presenting himself itself as time, we put something different in, put something useful in, put something positive, something uplifting for our own self. Every thought which is negative impacts our whole life, our whole health, and others too. And so your comment about giving a person a piece of your mind, yes, because every criticism takes so much of your character away from you. So there are underlying principles always at work. They can be controlled. We have to steer the mind in a useful way. That is why Raja Yoga is a very foundational text in the whole spiritual life, because it's saying the whole of spirituality really is to do with the mind. The mind is in the way. No, it's not that the mind has to be removed. The mind is an instrument. It has to be used in a proper way that delivers all the qualities that you want for yourself and others, and everything that is useful. This is the power of thought. Well, with that we can finish off. Have a few moments to spare, no doubt. But I think you may as well enjoy the remaining sunlight, I suppose, of your day.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good.
Thank you, Swamiji.